Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we continue with Part 5, St. Alban, the Protomartyr, of Masonic Orders of Fraternity by Manly P. Hall. Efforts have been made to prove that Lord Bacon was a Freemason and that the higher speculative teachings of the craft were largely the product of his genius. To date, no historical proof is available, but there is an impressive mass of circumstantial evidence. Alfred Dodd, the distinguished Baconian and Freemason, intimates that Bacon in his late teens became a Knight Templar in Ambassador Paulet's suite in France. See Francis Bacon's personal life story. From Old England, London 1854. The Hall of the Inner Temple. The room is dominated by the figure of the winged horse painted on the end wall. One of the principal symbols of Bacon's secret society of poets was the winged horse, Pegasus. It was the Italian poet Matteo Maria Barato, 1434 to 1494, in his Orlando Innamorato, who first regarded Pegasus as the horse of the Muses and employed it as a symbol of poetry. Boiato's poem served as a model for Ariosto's Orlando Furioso, and for the esoteric cycle of Charlemagne and Roland. While living in Gray's Inn, Bacon was a member of the Inner Temple, which was associated with the site of an ancient mansion of the Knights Templar. The winged horse Pegasus was the symbolic device of the Inner Temple, and a huge painting of this mythical creature adorned the wall of the principal room, as shown in the accompanying illustration. The close association of the horse of high verse with Bacon's activity and with the ancient order of the temple may indicate a trend. The condition of Freemasonry during the Elizabethan period can be estimated with some accuracy from scattered references. Emmanuel Rebold, in tracing the historical descent of the order, gives the following entry after the date 1561 AD. Queen Elizabeth, indigent that the Freemasons had not offered the Grand Mastership to her consort during his lifetime, on the 27th of December of this year, ordered the dissolution of the Masonic Assembly, which on that day commenced its semi-annual meeting, and ordered the execution of her edict to be enforced by a detachment of armed men. But upon a report having been made to her by the commanding officer of the detachment expressive of the political harmless character of the assembly, the Queen revoked her order. Subsequently, Queen Elizabeth became the protectress of the Freemasons of her kingdom and confirmed their choice of Thomas Saxville for Grand Master. See a general history of Freemasonry. James VI of Scotland was sympathetic to Masonry and was initiated into a duly appointed lodge. When he became James I of Great Britain, he encouraged Masonry among the English people, and many persons of high esteem joined lodges as honorary or accepted Masons. His successor, Charles I, was also an accepted Mason. Francis Bacon's numerous advancements in honors and esteems during the reign of James and the respect in which he was held by Charles would certainly have made it desirable and advantageous for him to have favored the inclinations of his sovereigns and to have followed their examples. In his writings, Bacon revealed a profound interest in several branches of learning associated with both speculative and operative Masonry, and stated directly that he desired to be considered an architect of arts and sciences. Masonic scholars have acknowledged that Bacon's New Atlantis inspired broad reforms in education, a program symbolized by the perfecting of King Solomon's house, an allegory very close to the hearts of Masons. His lordship's inclinations towards secret assembly and the quiet motivation of large projects revealed both his mood and his method. The occurrence of peculiar emblems later directly associated with Freemasonry on the title pages of early editions of the works of Bacon and his associates also suggest some hidden plan or purpose. We already mentioned that the numerical equivalent of the letters BACON is the Masonically significant number 33, the degrees of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. The letters AUM believed to stand for Artifex Universus Mundi, or the Great Architect of the World. By the same numerical cipher also give the sum 33. Thus, AUM is a cabala for Bacon. Even the Rosicrucian or Tudor rose, one of Bacon's emblems, suggests secrecy and is an appropriate device to conceal the identity of a hidden person or group. The term sub rosa, or beneath a rose, means that which is held or performed in confidence. In the cabal of state, the rose can be represented both a secret association and its concealed project. Bacon's activities have been summarized thus. But with Elizabeth came the great renaissance of literature, the recitation of learning by the great Lord Chancellor, Francis of Verulam, learned in the lore of his time as also with that of antiquity. He is said to have founded a great secret philosophical and literary society, comprising the chief literary men of his day, including Beaumont and Fletcher and Sir Philip Sidney, Isaac Casaubon, the classic scholar, Tyler, the water poet, Rare Ben Jonson and Shakespeare, and our own Elias Ashmole, made a Mason at Warrington, was also of the number, and here we may perhaps seek, not for the origin, but for the renaissance of our rituals and the resurrection of Masonry. Read Bacon's New Atlantis. Look to the mystic symbolism of the Shakespeare trilogy, The Tempest, The Midsummer Night's Dream, and The Winter Tale. From comments by Brother Hugh James upon a paper, some notes on the Legends of Masonry by William Harry Rayland, FSA, PAGDC, read before the Quarter Coronati Lodge, and published in volume 16 of its Transactions. Although Masonic records are inadequate for the period of the Commonwealth, 1649 through 1660, and it is generally supposed that the order was suspended during the Civil Wars, the period corresponding closely with the activities of that group, which appeared immediately after the Restoration as the Royal Society. The Abbé Leridan, in his Freemasons Crushed, attributed the origin of Masonry to the Lord Protector, Oliver Cromwell. According to this highly imaginative abbé, Cromwell proposed in guarded terms to some of his more intimate friends that a new society should be established to advance the true worship of God and to deliver mankind from oppression and tyranny. Leridan believed that the order was instituted in 1648 and included among its larger objectives the advancement of Cromwell to a position of supreme power. Others have held that the term Sons of the Widow referred to the loyalists laboring to restore the monarchy. The widow was Britannia deprived of her king. Facts, however, do not support this hypothesis. Section 3 of this series, Orders of Universal Reformation, contains an account of the rise of the Royal Society. This outline must now be enlarged, with special emphasis upon the Baconian influence during the transitional period in Freemasonry. In his work, Silva, or A Discourse of Forest Trees, etc., London, 1664, John Evelyn credits Bacon with the invention of both the new learning to which the Royal Society was dedicated and the formulation of the very design for such a group of learned men. In his curious work, Numismata, A Discourse of Metals, Evelyn included a short discourse into physiognomy. He discussed the characteristics of the fasces which appeared on certain medallions and commemorative issues of coinage. In My Lord Chancellor Bacon, he wrote, a spacious forehead and piercing eye, always, as I have been told by one who knew him well, looking forward as a soul in sublime contemplation, and as the person who by standing up against dogmatists was to emancipate and set free the long and miserably captivated philosopher, which has ever since made such conquest in the territories of nature. Courtesy of the San Francisco Public Library, engraved front piece from Spratt's History of the Royal Society. A few copies of the first edition of Spratt's The History of the Royal Society of London included a plate or an engraving by Wenceslaus Haller from a design by Evelyn. Perhaps it was intended for a large paper edition which did not materialize. The elusive plate, reproduced herewith, depicts 3 persons closely involved in the formation of the Royal Society. In the center on a pedestal is the bust of King Charles II, the founder and patron of the society in its surviving form. At the beholder's left is a seated figure of Lord Burnka, first president of the Royal Society. Opposite him is an unusual representation of Lord Bacon carrying in a purse the Great Seal of England. This group is placed upon a checkered board floor of black and white squares, and the background presents an array of scientific and mathematical instruments indicative of the interest of the society. The architectural style is in the preference of Christopher Wren. Courtesy of the Library of Scottish Rite Bodies, San Francisco. Designs for the armorial insignias and ciphers of the Royal Society. The sketch is preserved in Smith's Historical and Literary Curiosities, London, 1840. As Secretary of the Royal Society and a champion of Bacon's cause, Evelyn went so far as to sketch suitable heraldic devices to emblazon the purposes of this group. Evelyn developed his sketches according to principles of allegory rather than the rules of heredity, and his mottos were intended to convey the aims of the society. The improvements of science by means of extended communication varied by actual experiment only. Fortunately, the sheet of paper on which he made his first designs, together with several mottos, has been preserved. The first emblem is particularly Baconian. Within the shield is a ship under full sail, the same vessel which occurs on the title page of so many of Bacon's books. The motto, "And science shall be advanced," is merely a restatement of Bacon's outline for the advancement and proficiency of learning. The second shield is "Parted preface, argent and sable, issuant from clouds in chief, a hand holding a plumb line." The motto is from the Vulgate, translation of 1 Thessalonians 5:21, "Prove all things." The third shield is a blazoned sable, 2 telescopes extended in saltire, and on a chief argent the earth and planets. The motto is, "How much we know not." The fourth shield bears the sun in its splendor, with the motto, "To the greater light." Besides this quotation from the Georgics of Virgil, "Who dares accuse the sun of falsehood?" The next shield bears a canton only. The accompanying motto, "On the report of none," was latter adopted by the society. The last shield is charged with a terrestrial globe with a human eye in chief. Above is another motto from Virgil's Georgics, "To know the causes of things." To the right is the word, experiendo, meaning by experience, with a repetition of the accepted motto and the signature of Evelyn. King Charles, however, granted the society a more illustrious armorial bearing. See Section 3, Orders of Universal Reformation, page 85, for the arms of the Royal Society. In the character of incooperation, Evelyn wrote in his diary that on August 20, 1662, The king gave us the arms of England to be bore in a canton in our arms, and sent us a mace of silver gilt of the same fashion and bigness as those carried before his matey, to be bore before our president on meeting days. It was brought by Sir Gilbert Talbot, master of his matey, Jewel House. Later on, 13th of June, 1663, the officers of the Royal Society by common desire caused the Royal Grant of Arms, together with the trick, a sketch thereof, to be entered among the records in the volume of Royal Concessions in the College of Arms, which was done upon the motion of Elias Ashmole, Esquire, Windsor Herald, and one of the fellows of the said society. Dr. Spratt, see the History of the Royal Society of London, the first historian of the society, paid tribute to the genius that inspired the group. I shall only mention one great man who had the true imagination of the whole extent of this enterprise, as it is now set on foot, and that is the Lord Bacon, in whose books there are everywhere scattered the best arguments that can be produced for the defense of experimental philosophy, and the best directions that are needful to promote it, all which he has already adorned with so much art, that if my desires could have prevailed with some excellent friends of mine who engaged me to this work, there should have been no other preface to the history of the Royal Society but some of his writings. Arthur Dodd believes that Rosicrucians and Freemasons were driving forces behind the sequence of groups, the Invisible College, Gresham College, and the Academy, which finally emerged as the Royal Society. When we consider, he writes, that the real title of the New Atlantis was the Land of the Rosicrucians, with its ethical symbolism and its experimental marvels for the uplifting of humanity by applied science, and that a Masonic author like James Hughan declared that the New Atlantis seems to be, and probably is, the key to the modern rituals of Freemasonry. We can begin to see clearly the light shining in the darkness of Francis Bacon's early silent years. See Francis Bacon's personal life story. When the Viscountcy of St. Alban was bestowed upon him, Lord Bacon wrote, "I may now be buried in St. Alban's habit as he lived. The slightest of his lordship's sayings must be carefully weighed, for he seldom spoke except the matter be relevant. It is quite possible that he intended to imply that he was resolved to bury, that is, conceal, some part of his own identity beneath the cloak of an ancient and honored name. It was a curious coincidence, and almost too curious, that Bacon became Francis, Viscount St. Albans, and that the early Christian martyr, St. Albans, from whom the Viscounty received its name, was long and intimately connected with the early history of the Masonic Fraternity in England. Representations of the martyrdom of St. Alban were included in emblems known to have originated in the original Baconian group. The Royal Society was incorporated on St. Andrew's Day, so each fellow wore a St. Andrew's cross of ribbon on the crown of his hat. See John Evelyn by Arthur Ponsonby. In the Chemise Hussite, Christian Rosencreutz was made to say that when preparing himself for the chemical marriage, he bound a blood-red ribbon crossways over his shoulder and struck 4 red roses in his hat. The crest of Johann Valentin André was a St. Andrew's cross and 4 red roses, and the same cross is conspicuous on the arms of the town of St. Albans. St. Alban was born in Verulam of a noble family. He journeyed to Rome when he served for 7 years as a legionnaire under the Emperor Diocletian. Returning to Britain, he was converted to the Christian faith by the monk Amphibulus of Carneon, or Camelot, and in the 10th and last persecution of the Christians, he was beheaded 303 AD. Albanus was the first to suffer martyrdom for the Christian faith in Britain. The account of his death appears in the writings of the Venerable Bede, the Roman governor, learning that Albanus was protecting a Christian monk in his house, sent a troop of soldiers to arrest Amphibulus. In this emergency, Albanus put on a cloak of his guest and gave himself to the soldiers, thus permitting the holy man to escape. For this offense, and for his unwillingness to renounce his faith, Albanus was executed. His death was accompanied by miraculous occurrences, and his memory was widely venerated. The sacrifice he made was in vain, for Amphibulus was captured and killed a few days later. The references to St. Alban in the old Masonic records of England include remarkable embellishments of uncertain origin and antiquity. William Preston summarizes the final form of the Masonic versions. St. Alban was employed to environ the city of Verulam with a wall, and to build for him a splendid palace, and that to reward his diligence in executing these works, the emperor appointed him steward of his household and chief ruler of the realm. However this may be, from the corroborating testimony of ancient historians, we are assured that this knight was a celebrated architect and a real encourager of able workmen. It cannot, therefore, be supposed that Freemasonry would be neglected by so eminent a patron. See Illustrations of Masonry. According to the same author, the Emperor Carausius, who, incidentally, was merely a usurper of Britain, highly favored Masons and appointed Albanius his well-trusted steward, the principal superintendent of their assembly. Under his patronage, continues Preston, lodges and conventions of the fraternity were formed and the rites of Masonry regularly practiced. To enable the Masons to hold a general council, to establish their own government and correct errors among them, he granted them a charter, and Albanius to preside over them in person as Grand Master. This worthy knight proved a zealous friend to the craft, and assisted at the initiation of many persons into the mystery of the order. Although the martyrdom of St. Alban is sustained by a quantity of traditional history, the Masonic ornamentations are scarcely justified by the conservative account. Albanus was a Roman soldier, possibly an officer, but when he is called a knight, the title seems forced or unwarranted. There is no evidence that the martyr was a celebrated architect or that he was made Grand Master of the stonemasons, even assuming that such guilds existed in England at the time. His building a palace for Carausius, the usurper, and his other achievements as a master artisan are without factual foundation. Had Albanius been a chief ruler of the realm and a favorite of his king, his trial and execution would probably have been averted. Incidentally, the garment which Albanius wore on the occasion of his arrest was called a cabala, a cloak of wool said to resemble the vestment of old Jewish priests. The original cowl was preserved in the Church of Ely in a chest, which was opened during the reign of Edward II, 1300 AD. With the garment was found a writing which stated, "This is the cabala of Saint Amphibius, the monk and protector of Saint Alban, in which the Protomartyr of England suffered death under the cruel persecutions of Diocletian against the Christians." It was Miss Potts, and Francis Bacon in his Secret Society, who first pointed out the irregularities and inconsistencies in the Masonic legend of St. Alban. England under Carausius did not recognize the sovereignty of Diocletian. If for Amphibulus we substitute the secret priesthood of the Grail Mysteries and the Albigensian heresy, we shall be nearer to the facts. Carausius is a splendid cover for James I, regarded by many of his subjects as without just claim to the crown. Change St. Alban to Viscount St. Albans, and shift the time to the first quarter of the 17th century, and the results are most informative. If Lord Bacon wished to hide his secret society or his own place in that society, what, of course, would be simpler than that cover himself with a cabala of the ancient and venerated martyr? Bacon was a knight before he was elevated to peerage. He He was of noble family and he presided over a secret society. He was the real encourager of able workmen, the chief ruler of the realm by the favor of his king, and a patron of all kinds of learning. After his lordship was created Viscount St. Albans, there appears to have been further manipulation of the legend. The Protomartyr was never next into the king in authority, but Bacon as High Chancellor occupied his exact position and was vital ruler of the state. It was also Lord Verulam, and not the Roman soldier, who built a magnificent palace for his king, a temple of learning, which, as James did not hesitate to acknowledge, was the greatest ornament of his nation. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.